What's the worst traffic jam you've ever been stuck in? How long did it last? An hour? 2 hours? 3? What would you do if you were stuck in a traffic jam that lasted an entire day? A full week? What if you were stuck in a traffic jam that lasted for 12 days? Look, as a Pennsylvanian who's into escape rooms, I can vouch for Pennsylvania roads essentially being their own state-funded version, where the only clue for escape is the sign saying road work ahead. Just find an exit, dude, in that case. I mean, even if it's an exit to Reading, you just take it. But you know, even the worst Pennsylvania traffic wasn't this. August marks 15 years since the largest traffic jam in recorded history. The traffic jam that clogged China's National Highway G110. It was a staggering 12-day saga that resulted in an entire economy developing inside of it. So how did this traffic jam happen? How did people manage for its duration? What were its historical causes, and what were its lasting effects? Luckily, this story won't take 12 days to tell, though I could if I thought the algorithm would reward it, but This is RCR Stories, the 12-day traffic jam. On August 14th, 2010, a traffic jam began to take shape on China National Highway 110, or G110, and the Beijing-Tibet Expressway. This occurred near Hebei, China's 6th most populous province, and Inner Mongolia, which is an autonomous region of China. Now, this started out as nothing more than your run-of-the-mill congestion, like rush hour on US Route 422, or the slow holiday migration of Thanksgiving, as we travel to the homes of perpetually irritable relatives with blood pressure so high their medication is filing for workman's comp. Traffic jams certainly weren't anything new in China, or on the G110 for that matter. Significant traffic increases had been reported earlier that summer, and just 6 years earlier, in October and November of 2004, a large traffic jam occurred on the highway as a result of motorists being redirected onto that highway from a neighboring expressway, which was experiencing its own traffic jam, thereby creating an even bigger traffic jam. So yeah, this wasn't new for the G110. But this situation was different for a number of reasons. For one, because of the time of year, it was swelteringly hot. As the traffic began to slow and the congestion became more congested, drivers were pretty much stuck in place. And when you're stuck in traffic for a really long time, you're probably going to shut your engine off to conserve fuel and battery. But that puts you at the mercy of the weather. The heat bore down on the drivers, some of whom were just your regular civilian drivers, while others were part of the very necessary transportation of raw materials across the country. Which brings us to the second detail separating this from similar traffic instances. Due to the time of year, there were more delivery trucks on the road than usual, with the number of trucks using the road during that time period increasing to a peak of roughly 17,000 units per day. Big, heavy, slow-moving vehicles that choked the roadways and created bottlenecks. At least, depending on whom you ask. I'm not entirely sure this all goes away if we magically convert the trucks into compacts. But either way, one thing was clear. What had been a fairly standard, if deeply frustrating traffic jam, was clearly becoming something far bigger and less governable than anticipated. As the congestion ballooned to 60 miles. 60 miles this traffic jam stretched. and hardly any progress was being made from day to day, much less from hour to hour. It's like being forcibly put on vacation, but I mean, were people even being paid during this period, or were you just put on unpaid leave until the traffic jam sort of eased up? Basically, what I want to know is, am I still going to have sick days left after this? And is traffic moving at all? Or are we just sitting here getting slow roasted like Dutch oven carnitas? Well, for the most part, it went like this. People got in their cars, moved a little bit as traffic flow allowed, shut their vehicles off to preserve fuel and battery life, suffered because they had no AC, got out to walk around, and then came back to move forward again once traffic had crept up a bit. And it continued that way for the first week of the traffic jam. Now, I've found some conflicting reports on just how long some people were stuck in the jam. Even if it was at the pace of continental drift, traffic was moving, and so while some reports seem to indicate that there were drivers stuck for virtually the entire 12 days, there were others who weren't stuck nearly as long. But even then, I'd read that not nearly as long still comes out to something like 5 days. And look, whether they were stuck there the full 12 days, just 5, or somewhere in between, it's hard to imagine the sense of dread setting in after the first 3-4 hours, much less the first day of being stuck in this commute from hell, because when you start your commute in the morning, you don't anticipate that it could be the last time you're home for literal days. Most people don't prepare for that kind of event. They don't keep provisions in their car in the case of being stranded. Maybe they keep first aid, a toolkit, a jack stand, and tire iron. Totally. Some even keep bottles of water. But are you keeping food, toilet paper, a toothbrush, cigarettes, your anti-anxiety medication, your heart medication, your ibuprofen, your anti-diarrheal, soap, toilet paper again? Toothpaste. How prepared is the average person, really, for something like this? Reports at the time provided details on how the motorists were getting by, and the running theme among all those stories was that if you ever wanted to go on the show Survivor, this probably would have been pretty good training for it. As hours stretched into days, the experience took on a survivalist color, like living on the campgrounds of one of those fictional billionaires who hunts people, and whose existence gains factual potential with each passing day. I mean, really, you're on the highway, and while this traffic jam stretched for 60 miles, I would think most people weren't on a stretch that neighbored vegetation or naturally occurring food and sources. And even if they did, was the water safe to drink? Do you have any way of boiling it? That was one of the hurdles faced by a man who had a pack of instant noodles on him, along with a bottle of water. So he had the supplies, except for some way to heat the water to eat the noodles in the first place. I mean, I suppose he could have heated the water in some sort of container on his engine, but then you're just wasting gas and I don't know, can you eat instant noodles with room temperature water? I would imagine you could, but it's probably gonna taste like divorce, and also give you the runs. And of course, there were no toilets, so people just did their business on the side of the road, and I can't imagine it left the highway smelling anything other than like hell's porta potty, especially when you take the heat into consideration. You know, the smell had to at least be on the same level of generational horror as that one scene in E.T. where they find the little alien blanched on the side of a creek, looking like afterbirth coated in powdered sugar. That was Steven Spielberg scarring my entire generation some 12 years before Schindler's List and roughly 16 years before Saving Private Ryan. Because for as much credit as we give Steven Spielberg for being a really heartwarming storyteller, you gotta drag your emotions over broken glass to get there. Now, truck drivers would wash themselves with whatever was stored in the water box of their trucks, and slept under the cars to avoid the heat. People played cards or chess to pass the time and ate whatever they had on hand. One driver subsisted on some ham sausages he had, which I'd say makes him an honorary Pennsylvanian on the first day of hunting season. Others, meanwhile, got by with food they were able to acquire from a different source. Yes, this is where the roadside economy developed, because never let it be said that making money off of other people's inconvenience is strictly an American thing. Vendors popped up, some on bicycles and others with pop-up kiosks offering food, water, and other goods. And because they knew these motorists had no other options, they gouged the absolute hell out of these poor drivers. That motorist who didn't have any water for his instant noodles, he never did get that water because he refused to pay the extortionate prices the vendors were charging. In some cases, as expensive as the noodles themselves, which already weren't cheap. As one motorist would tell Global Times, some vendors were selling instant noodles at 4 times above retail. A bottle of water, which typically cost 1 yuan, was now going for 15 on the highway. Cigarettes were made available to nicotine-starved drivers who had no choice but to pay significant markups, because nothing gives you a hankering for carcinogens like being surrounded by exhaust fumes for a week. Meanwhile, boxed lunches were provided at prices that proved to be more expensive than eating at a restaurant. As one motorist noted, a boxed lunch cost 10 yuan, which is about $1.39. But they were so small, he needed more than one. So he found himself spending more than 50 yuan, or $6.96 per day on food alone, which, as he told reporters, was more than the cost of eating out for him. Now, of course, motorists had the choice of paying those prices or continuing to ration what they had, since nobody really knew how long this jam would last. On the one hand, the road construction that was initially blamed for restricting the inbound traffic flow wasn't expected to be completed until September 17, 2010. Over a month after the traffic jam had started. However, authorities were doing their best to move things along by getting the trucking companies to put a pause on their operations, redirecting civilian motorists away from routes that could lead them into this traffic jam, and rerouting some trucks carrying essential supplies like food and flammables, and redirecting vehicles out of the way to get them through and free up some more space for traffic to resume. It was a Herculean effort, and it required a large-scale mobilization and just boots on the ground, helping to redirect, helping to coordinate. So while I wouldn't say it was an overly optimistic situation, there was enough hope to prevent people from caving to the vendors' price gouging tactics. Because again, you just don't know how long this is going to last. Even after the first day, even after the first week, it was possible that the jam could open up and traffic could begin moving again, at least to a point where vehicles could exit and find alternate routes home. On average, traffic moved forward by 1 kilometer per day, which isn't much when you're in a traffic jam spanning the equivalent of 60 miles. But it was something, and so people decided, hey, maybe let's not pay outrageous prices for what this vendor is selling, because we might be free of this at any minute. Or maybe it really was as simple as, hey, we might be stuck in this for a while yet, but that doesn't mean we need to be paying these prices. These aren't nosebleeds at the Eras tour. We can hold out. And I totally understand the hesitation, because why buy a bottle of water at the price of a full meal in some restaurants? This isn't an American movie theater. And even if the price doesn't seem like a lot in Uncle Sam's Smackers, the upcharge relative to the fair market retail price and the value of what was offered was downright preposterous. And at that point and at those prices, you gotta just tell vendors to hit the bricks. But the problem was that some of the vendors responded by actually doing that. As one driver would later recount, if you didn't buy from the vendors at these inflated front row at WrestleMania prices, some of them would get mad and throw actual bricks at your window. So now you weren't just sitting in a hot car all day, you were sitting in one with busted windows. So in that sense, it wasn't really a surprise that police appeared on the scene en masse. There had been accidents, and cars breaking down, yes, but there had been an attitude of lawlessness that had taken root. Unattended vehicles became prime targets for thieves, and in fact, some of the attended vehicles did too, for that matter. According to the wife of one of the drivers trapped in the congestion, around 8 robbers broke into 6 trucks and cars, making off with a total of 60,000 yuan, which is over $8,000. In addition to attacking an older driver and shattering the windshield of one of the trucks. In response, a 24-hour patrol of some 400 police officers took to the highway, and I could only imagine that if they had to drive there, their presence probably just made the traffic jam worse, provided they could even get anywhere near it. But hey, conjecture. A week had stretched into 8 days, 9, 10. People were homesick, restless, frightened, and losing hope. And while, surprisingly, there weren't any road rage incidents reported, it's kind of hard when you consider that there wasn't really any road on which to rage. Just a tightly packed, densely populated highway with cars that had to function as mobile homes for a week and counting. And as the heat thickened and people despaired of ever going home, one question loomed over all. How on earth did this happen? There are 3 main culprits behind this traffic jam that developed independently of one another, yet somehow came together in this one particular instance to create the worst traffic jam in recorded history. And arguably the main culprit was the highway itself. You see, a lot of this dates back to the 1980s, as China first proposed the National Trunk Highway System in 1988, with the goal of expanding the nation's highway infrastructure from 147 kilometers to 35,000 kilometers by the year 2020. The reason for the lack of a more rigorous highway system, to my understanding, is that it wasn't really nationalized, since at the time, roads were mostly the domain of the regional governments. So similar to what we have now, PennDOT takes care of the roads in Pennsylvania, and maybe some glorious day in the future we won't have construction on them year-round. But hey, that's what it takes. But our highways had a component of federal action backing them, and that's what this National Trunk Highway System was going to do for China. And it's more or less what it did. Impressively, they accomplished their goal 13 years ahead of schedule, presumably because they were able to fund its accelerated development by charging tolls that reportedly added up to about 0.5 yuan, or 7 cents, per kilometer, which comes out to damn near 12 cents per mile. As Forbes noted in 2010, this exceeded the cost of fuel for many drivers. So it's basically like charging people to use the sidewalk and then adding an extra fee for each step. What planet is this, Ferenginar? By 2005, more than 1.8 million kilometers were open to public driving, and some 350 billion yuan had been invested in the infrastructure. It was one of the world's most expansive and sophisticated roadway systems, connecting more than 200 cities by the time the north to south and east to west arterial highways were completed in 2008. Now, China has a population of about 1.4 billion people, 523 million of whom are drivers, meaning China has more licensed motorists than America has people. So it made sense to create an expansive series of roadways to accommodate travel across the world's 3rd largest country. And so that's what they did. But there was just one problem. Apparently, this wasn't a controlled access highway. You see, controlled access highways are not simply for accommodating high-speed traffic. Their benefits include a more regulated traffic flow and more lanes for increased traffic volumes. The G110 was not optimized for these high volumes, and this was compounded by traffic increasing by 40% per year and exceeding 60% of the highway's design capacity by the time of this traffic jam. More resources could have been placed in expanding the roadways, and plans were in place for such an expansion, but the government simply prioritized high-speed rail development, which is a nice idea, yet there's no guarantee that a large road expansion project would even have made things better before making them worse, since the aforementioned road construction and maintenance work being performed on Highway 110 and the Beijing-Tibet Expressway cut road capacity by 50%. Terrible traffic jams were basically an inevitability. But another major issue causing the congestion was coal. In 2010, coal had been responsible for 70% of China's energy for more than half a century. This dates back to 1949, when Mao Zedong's Red Army seized Beijing and decided to use coal as the backbone of a redeveloped economy in the wake of its long-term occupation by Japan. Coal output was 30 million metric tons by the end of 1949. By 1978, it was 618 million metric tons, and now private enterprises were getting in on coal too. Because capitalism. By 2010, large coal fields had been discovered in Inner Mongolia, which increased coal output to 3.2 billion metric tons, but also added 40% to the traffic in the region, since the railway capacity was deemed insufficient for mass transport. Findings from the time reported that less than 40% of the coal mined in Inner Mongolia was transported by rail, putting the burden of transport on a highway system ill-equipped to manage it, at a time of year when it had no choice but to try. You see, the month of the year at which coal was routinely transported was August, which meant more coal trucks on the road than at any point during the year, traveling longer and longer distances by necessity. A 2010 report by China Daily noted that, quote, coal and gas reserves are concentrated in western regions of China, like Shaanxi Province and Inner Mongolia, while consumption is largely in the east, thousands of kilometers away. As few companies use rail freight services, the huge demand has put even more strain on a highway network that is struggling to cope with sheer weight of traffic. End quote. And this leads us to the third culprit behind this traffic jam, which is really an extension of the second. You could really kind of combine them into one if we're being serious here, because the third culprit is the truck drivers themselves. Okay, maybe not just the drivers, but also their bosses. You see, trucks were being overloaded, not simply due to the importance of coal to the region, but due to companies believing they needed to do this in order to make a profit. And it seems to have been a sentiment that was shared by the drivers, as one trucker told reporters, quote, I pay 1,300 yuan for fuel, roughly 1,000 yuan in toll fees, and about 600 yuan in other expenses. If I carried only the 26 tons my truck is allowed to, the trip wouldn't even cover my costs. End quote. So trucks were packed tight. Essentially, this is the automotive equivalent of trying to bring all the grocery bags in on one trip. But the problem is that when trucks are overloaded, they put additional stress on the roads, which could lead to the roads becoming damaged, and therefore lead to more construction work to fix the damage, resulting in more traffic jams, to say nothing of the damage potentially being done to these trucks themselves, which will slow traffic even further if they break down. Now, while the Beijing-Tibet Expressway was generally seen as the superior route for time and cost, the G110 was an alternative that allowed truck drivers some flexibility, particularly in a profession where being punctual isn't valuable if it comes at greater expense. As another driver told China Daily, quote, "Each extra kilometer adds at least 3 yuan to your costs, such as fuel and road tolls. Drivers would rather waste time than money if they are not in a hurry." End quote. Naturally, if their truck is overloaded, there's every possibility that they couldn't be in a hurry even if they wanted to be. As a researcher for the National Development and Reform Commission's Institute of Comprehensive Transportation stated in 2010, overloaded trucks have a maximum speed of approximately 50 kilometers per hour. The average speed on the highway is 110 kilometers per hour. So these big, slow-moving trucks were contributing to a more sluggish flow of traffic. So to crack down on overloading, inspection stations and checkpoints were established on roadways throughout the country. That's a good thing, right? Well, you'd think so, but as it turns out, these inspection stations would weigh the cargo, and this sometimes meant that the cargo had to be unloaded entirely, leading to additional slowdowns. And those are for the truck drivers who actually decided to travel on roadways with known inspection stations, because many chose to avoid those routes altogether, and not just due to slowdowns, but due to issues with documentation. Apparently, some drivers lacked the appropriate paperwork for transporting coal altogether. And so, to avoid ending up on the wrong side of the law, they found alternate routes entirely. One such route was the Beijing-Tibet Expressway and the G110. Yet one bonus potential culprit for this traffic jam could simply be the way traffic is regulated in Beijing. You see, in the run-up to the 2008 Summer Olympics, Beijing introduced a system that would allow private vehicles to only be driven on non-consecutive days, with allocations decided by license plate number. As I understand it, plates with certain tail numbers, or the last number on their license plate, would be restricted from entering the city center during peak hours. And so an example pattern would be that cars with plates ending in 1 and 6 would be banned on Monday, 2 and 7 would be banned on Tuesday, 3 and 8 would be banned on Wednesday, 4 and 9 on Thursday, and 5 and 0 on Friday. The idea wasn't just to curb traffic, but also improve air quality in advance of the summer games, and related tourism. But this created issues where traffic worsened on days with certain numbers. For instance, if there were fewer vehicles with license plates ending in 4 and 9, then that meant there were fewer vehicles being restricted, meaning traffic was nearly as bad as if there had been no restrictions at all. In fact, this is the specific example that the deputy director of the Beijing Transportation Research Center cited, noting that on days with a 4 and 9, you could see traffic jams 3 to 4 hours longer than usual. Now, while this was unlikely to be a direct cause of the G110 traffic jam starting, since August 14th was a Saturday that year, and weekends were exempt from the license plate rotation, there's every possibility it contributed to the congestion growing over the subsequent days. But then again, that's purely conjecture on my part, and you can freely disregard that entirely. Now, to mitigate the issues faced by the license plate restrictions, Beijing's local government would announce in 2024 that they would introduce a round-robin version of this system, where the numbered days would change throughout the year, basically once a quarter, so that, say, Thursday wasn't always a 4 and 9 day. For example, from April 1st to June 30th, 2024, Mondays would be 5 and 0 days, Tuesday 1 and 6, Wednesday 2 and 7, Thursday 3 and 8, and Friday 4 and 9. And the numbers would rotate again each quarter throughout the year-long period as a way to keep things manageable and regulated. But even then, you're still going to have traffic. There's always going to be traffic. Maybe not as bad as the G110 incident, but bad enough for Chinese citizens to wind up spending a not insignificant portion of their lives stuck in their car. In short, this was always going to happen. It was just a matter of time. But thankfully for the drivers stuck in that awful commute, they wouldn't have to sacrifice much more of it. The strangest thing about the 12-day traffic jam wasn't its cause. It wasn't even what people did while they were stuck in its midst. The strangest thing about the 12-day traffic jam was just how abruptly it ended. On August 26, 2010, the flow of traffic suddenly, inexplicably, almost magically resumed. Of course, it wasn't magic that did it at all. It reportedly was the work of the aforementioned authorities who'd been working round the clock to loosen up the congestion like a lozenge working its way through a mucus-lined path. Yet, for 12 days' effort, it didn't seem as gradual as it probably was. It seemed instantaneous. MSNBC's Adrian Mong would write, quote, "Virtually overnight, local authorities had managed to disperse the congestion about 120 miles northwest from Beijing, so by the time we reached the area, all we encountered were the garden-variety traffic jams here and there." End quote. Traffic authorities in the region, roughly 90 miles northwest of Beijing, noted that some roads remained crowded as a considerable line of trucks were waiting at the border of Mongolia to receive permission to enter. But for the most part, traffic had returned to normal. Cars that had largely sat for days finally got moving. Vendors were out of their endless money glitch, and would-be robbers no longer had sitting ducks to target on the G110. And there had been a lot of them. Over the duration of the nearly 2-week-long congestion, roughly 10,000 vehicles had been caught up in all that traffic. And yet, in the aftermath, you'd be hard-pressed to believe anything had ever happened at all. Because, in every respect but its duration, there was nothing particularly exceptional about this traffic jam. Congestion was just a fact of driving on China's national highway system. A report by the Globe and Mail noted that efforts were made to try and mitigate this kind of incident. Quote, "While this particular jam has caught the world's attention, traffic headaches in Beijing are not new, and the city has taken previous measures to relieve the roadway congestion. The capital city has a ban that keeps private cars off the road 1 workday a week in urban areas. It has also introduced staggered working hours and raised parking fees in downtown areas to ease the traffic pressure." Beijing Mayor Guo Jinlong said in a government report in January that the city plans to encourage public transportation by extending light rail and opening more express bus lines. But getting people out of their cars has not been easy. Last year, the rate of people who took public transportation for their daily commute in Beijing was only 38%, according to the mayoral report. End quote. Now, this didn't stop the government from investing further into more robust transit systems. In 2016, China reportedly loosened their population requirements for cities looking for infrastructure investments. Programs that had been restricted to cities of at least 3 million people would now be open to cities with a population of roughly half, so 1.5 million people. And alternative forms of travel clearly became necessary, not just due to the 2010 traffic jam, but subsequent incidents in the years that followed. For example, on Tuesday, October 6, 2015, the 50-lane G4 Beijing-Hong Kong-Macau Expressway experienced one of the largest traffic jams of the decade. The 2015 traffic jam originated just outside Beijing, and it had a unique, though not altogether unfamiliar, cause to any American who ever tried to go to the beach during 4th of July weekend. Yeah, this traffic jam was the simple result of holiday travel. In particular, all of the travel taking place during a week-long national holiday known as Golden Week. But it wasn't just the travel. No. You see, in much the same way American authorities set up checkpoints during holiday travel, a checkpoint introduced just outside Beijing was said to have created a bottleneck that stopped traffic. Now, somewhere around 72 million Americans traveled for 4th of July weekend this year, which was a record, with AAA reporting that 61.6 million of those travelers were traveling by car. But during Golden Week, roughly 750 million, or 750 million people, were engaging in some kind of travel. So not necessarily all of it driving, but some kind of travel. And I would imagine that the amount of drivers far exceeded 61.6 million. So yeah, the conditions were already bad, and the necessity of a checkpoint would only slow traffic down even further. Though it's kind of surprising, to me at least, that conditions weren't worse. Granted, this didn't last anywhere near as long as the G110 incident did, and while I couldn't find definitive sources, one article noted that the worst of it was around 10 hours or so. But still, 10 hours? Ugh. If nothing else, this illustrated that China's traffic problem wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Historically, there have been longer traffic jams in terms of length, with a traffic jam in the 1980s from Lyon to Paris stretching for 175 kilometers, or the average length of a fresh-baked baguette. And there have been traffic jams that involved a larger number of vehicles, as seen in a traffic jam in the 90s from East to West Germany that trapped an approximate 18 million vehicles, likely a bunch of BMWs lightly kissing each other's bumpers. But in terms of duration, National Highway 110 has them all beat. And while it might never happen again, it's terrifying to think it ever could. I mean, the EV infrastructure is in place, and it seems like there are more electric vehicles on the road in China than before. So, if a short trip turns into a week or more stuck in traffic, talk about range anxiety. Sheesh, talk about regular anxiety. Thank you so much for watching. If RCR brings any sort of value to your week at all, please consider leaving a like, a comment, sharing the video, or even subscribing, and treating that bell icon like a speed bag. But if you love RCR Stories and you want me to make more of these videos, Patreon is the absolute best and really the only way to keep these long-form automotive videos coming. I love talking about automotive history and weird stories in the realm of automotive history, but the algorithm doesn't always love it. So if you want to see more of these, please consider supporting us. It will really help us to continue delivering the absolute best content we know how to make. And for your subscription, you'll get these videos early, along with other exclusive content you'll never see here. It's all linked in the description. Thank you so much for supporting RCR with your viewership, and let me know what you think in the comments. Be on the lookout, my screen name is Limited Time Roman. I love interacting with you guys on my videos. It's one of the highlights of my week. But for now, thanks again, and have a great rest of your week. Dissatisfaction, disappointment, secondhand burnout. Algorithmosis affects millions of viewers every single day. If you've ever rolled your eyes at seeing a content creator you love resort to YouTuber face to be noticed by a bunch of ones and zeros, algorithmosis may be affecting you. But now there's hope with once monthly Patreon. With Patreon, $1 a month can help regular car reviews to continue to provide quality automotive content without clickbait titles or thumbnails with stunned looks that you can only compare to an O-face for the first nut after No Goon June. Unlock early access videos, uncensored, advertiser-unfriendly alternate takes, and exclusives like the Regular Friends podcast, diary videos, and Brian's take on select race-to-the-bottom cars, featuring the type of humor that brought regular car reviews to the dance, while simultaneously making them both functionally unemployable in the real world. Not into Patreon but want to cure your algorithmosis? Order from our merch store linked below, and Roman will send you a personalized thank you video, whether you want one or not. Side effects of supporting regular car reviews on Patreon may include entertainment, feelings of accomplishment, early access-induced euphoria, increased length and girth, spontaneous applause upon entering any room, biological immortality, exemption from No Cream Pie July, No Bust August, Don't Touch Your Member September, No Boner October, No Nut November, and Don't Touch Your Member September but in December. Do not use Patreon if you have a happiness allergy. Keep filling the tank after the fuel dispenser clicks. Continue spinning on Wheel of Fortune when you know the answer and most of the letters are already filled in anyway. Or you post first in the comments of every video no matter how long the video's already been up. Ask your mechanic's dog if Patreon is right for you. Regular car reviews on Patreon. Insert line to close out advertisement today.